costume during the 12th century in Europe was simple and differed only in details from the clothing of the preceding centuries. Men wore knee-length tunics for most activities, and men of the upper classes wore long tunics, with hose and mantles or cloaks. Women wore long tunics or gowns. A close fit to the body, full skirts, and long flaring sleeves were characteristic of upper-class fashion for both men and women. General trends. Overview. As in the previous centuries, two styles of dress existed side by side for men. A short costume deriving from a melding of the everyday dress of the later Roman Empire and the short tunics worn by the invading barbarians, and a long costume descended from the clothing of the Roman upper classes and influenced by Byzantine dress. Fabrics and furs. Wool remained the primary fabric for clothing of all classes, while linen undergarments, which were more comfortable against the skin and could be washed and then bleached in the sun, were increasingly worn. Silk, although extremely expensive, was readily available to wealthy people of consequence. Silks from Byzantium were traded in Pavia by way of Venice, and silks from Andalusia reached France via Spain. In the last decade of the previous century, the Norman reconquest of Sicily and the First Crusade had opened additional routes for Eastern fabrics and style influences into Europe. Fur was worn as an inside lining for warmth. There, the fur of the squirrel was particularly popular and can be seen in many illuminated manuscript illustrations, where it is shown as a white and blue-gray softly striped or checkered pattern lining the mantles of the wealthy. The blyout, a new French fashion for both men and women, was the blyout or bliaud, a long outer tunic with full skirts from the hip and sleeves that fitted tightly to the elbow and then flared into a trumpet shape. Early bliauts were moderately fitted and bloused slightly over the belt at the waist. Later the blyout was fitted tightly to the body from shoulder to hip, and the belt, or girdle, was wrapped twice around the waist and knotted in front of the abdomen. Men's clothing. Shirts, bras, and trousers. Underclothes consisted of an inner tunic or shirt with long, tight sleeves, and drawers or bras, usually of linen. Tailored cloth leggings called trousers or hose, made as separate garments for each leg, were often worn with the tunic. Striped hose were popular. During this period, beginning with the middle and upper classes, hose became longer and more fitting, and they reached above the knees. Previously, they were looser and worn with drawers that ranged from knee to ankle length. The new type of hose was worn with drawers that reached the knees or above, and they were wide enough at the top to allow the drawers to be tucked into them. They were held up in place by being attached to the girdle of the drawers. The better fit and girdle attachment of this new hose eliminated the need for the leg bands often worn with earlier hose. In England, however, leg bands continued to be worn by some people, both rich and poor, right up to the reign of Richard I. After 1200 they were largely abandoned. Outer tunics and doublets over the undertunic and hose. Men wore an outer tunic that reached to the knees or ankles, and that was fastened at the waist with a belt. Fitted bliauts, of wool or, increasingly, silk, had sleeves that were cut wide at the wrist and gored skirts. Men wore bliauts open to the waist front and back or at the side seams. Newly fashionable were short, fitted garments for the upper body, worn under the tunic. The doublet, made of 2 layers of linen, and an early form of quilted and padded jupe or guipon. The sleeveless surcoat or cyclar was introduced during this period as protective covering for armor during the Crusades. By the next century, it would become widely adopted as civilian dress. Rectangular and circular cloaks were worn over the tunic. These fastened on the right shoulder or at the center front. Headgear. Men of the upper classes often went hatless. The chaperon in the form of hood and attached shoulder-length cape was worn during this period, especially by the rural lower classes, and the fitted linen coif tied under the chin appeared very late in the century. Small round or slightly conical caps with rolled brims were worn, and straw hats were worn for outdoor work in summer. Style. Gallery 1 tunics. 2 Richard I of England. 3. Feasting. 4. Geoffrey of Anjou. Illustration of the Antichrist shows long and short tunics and hose or leggings. The king wears a red mantle lined in vair fastened on one shoulder. 1180. Richard the Lionheart is portrayed in a long tunic with tight sleeves and a mantle. Late 12th century. Man feasting wears a cap with a rolled brim and a tunic with wide turned-back cuffs. England. 1170. Monument of Geoffrey of Anjou depicts him in a calf-length over-tunic and long under-tunic, with a blue mantle lined in vair. He wears a cap with his coat of arms. Women's clothing. Chemise and tunic. Women's clothing consisted of an undertunic called a chemise, chainsaw or smock, usually of linen, over which was worn one or more ankle-to-floor-length tunics. Working-class women wore their tunics ankle-length and belted at the waist. Women of the French court wore a loosely fitted tunic called a cotte or the form-fitting bly-out over a full chemise with tight sleeves. The bly-out had a flaring skirt and sleeves tight to the elbow and then widening to wrist in a trumpet shape. A bly-out apparently cut in one piece from neckline to hem depicted on a column figure of a woman at the Cathedral of St. Maurice at Angers has visible side lacing and is belted at the natural waistline. A new fashion, the bly-out gironne, arose in mid-century. This dress is cut in two pieces, a fitted upper portion with a finely pleated skirt attached to a low waistband. The fitted bly-out was sometimes worn with a long belt or cincture that looped around a slightly raised waist and was knotted over the abdomen. The cincture could have decorative tassels or metal tags at the ends. In England, the fashionable gown was wide at the wrist but without the trumpet-shaped flare from the elbow seen in France. Hairstyles and headdresses. Married women, in keeping with Christian custom, wore veils over their hair, which was often parted in the center and hung down in long braids that might be extended with false hair or purchased hair from the dead, a habit decried by moralists. The wimple was introduced in England late in the century. It consisted of a linen cloth that covered the throat, and that was fastened about the head, under the veil. Style Gallery. 1. Bly-out. 2. Bly-out gironne. 3. Girdle. 4. Eve spinning. 5. 2 women. 6. Iberian royalty. Woman wears a bly-out cut in one piece from neck to hem and laced at the sides, over a chemise with tight sleeves. Overall she wears a mantle tied with a double cord. Cathedral St. Maurice Angers, between 1130 and 1160. Bly-out gironne has a finely pleated skirt attached to a decorative waistband at hip level. The bly-out is worn with a knotted girdle or cincture. Cathedral Notre Dame de Chartres, between 1130 to 1160. Detail of the knotted girdle worn with the bly-out gironne at Chartres. The waistband of the skirt can be seen above the knotted girdle. Eve spinning in a long gown with straight sleeves and a linen veil. 1170. 2 women from the Hairstyles Psalter. The woman on the left wears a veil and mantle. The young woman on the right wears her hair uncovered, and her gown sleeves are wide at the wrist as seen in English fashion c. 1170. Queen Leonor of England, sitting on the far left, wears a veil that covers most of her body. Working clothes. 1. Haymaking. 2. Digging. 3. Pruning grapevines. 4. Harvesting grapes. Mowing hay. The man on the right works in linen brise. 1170. Man digging has tucked up his long tunic, which he wears with trousers and ankle-high shoes. 1170. Men pruning grapevines wear short tunics and trousers. The man on the left wears a hood over a linen coif. Normandy. 1180. Men harvesting grapes. The man on the right wears brise and a coif. Normandy. 1180.